I want to welcome everybody here tonight, and we're going to be looking at the second chapter of Revelation, and probably only going to get through a few verses tonight because we want to concentrate on the letter to Smyrna and what we got to learn from that. Okay. And I'm going to change a few things here because I need to, I'm looking at the my presentation, and I can't see everything, so I've got to slide it over just a little bit. All right, I think we're good to go here now. Wanted to start out with the reading of the first chapter 2, verse 8 through 11, and we're just going to do the first two verses there, 8 and 9. To the angel of Messiah's community in Smyrna write, "Thus says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, yet you are rich, as well as the slander of those who say they are Jewish and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan." All right, so with that, we're going to discuss all sorts of stuff tonight, and you know, if anyone has any comments or questions, I think it's pretty quiet tonight. You can just unmute yourself and jump in. So where was Smyrna? Smyrna is it's a city that was about, I think, about 35 miles north of Ephesus. On the it's on that Asia Minor Peninsula, you know, in Turkey, and that's what we would. It's in where we would say Turkey is today. And it was a very, very wealthy city. They had it was an older city. It had been established, you know, several hundred years before the birth of Yeshua, and then it had been destroyed. And then Alexander the Great just went through there, and he saw what a beautiful place it was, and he decided that, okay, we need to rebuild this place. And so it was rebuilt. So people will talk about the old Smyrna and the new Smyrna, the new one being started around you know, 300 BC, something like that. So it was you know, new is relative, is a relative word. It's like I went to Lubeck, Germany one time and was going through a tour of some big cathedral, and the guy that was giving the tour said, yeah, the cathedral dates back to 12 something, you know, they finished in like 1275 or something like that. And but he said, but we have a new organ in the place, because it is, and I said, well, you know, how new is new? And he said, oh, well, it was put in the 1700s. So yeah, you know, the things sometimes when you're talking about other parts of the world besides the United States, where everything is pretty relative. But Smyrna even had, it was interesting, they enjoyed a privileged status from Rome, and what that meant was that back when well, this was about I don't know, 100 years before before Yeshua was born, the king of that area died without an heir, and so what he did was he just deeded his whole kingdom, everything in his kingdom, over to the Roman government. And so they, in fact, they built, in the people from Smyrna built a temple to Dea Roma, which is the goddess of Rome. and so it was kind of like the spiritual symbol of the empire. So once this spirit of Rome was established and was worshipped, it wasn't all that much of a jump for the people of Smyrna to then get into the worship of dead emperors of Rome. And so then it was even a smaller step then to get into what they call emperor worship, and that's kind of where they were, in the writing of Revelation. That's kind of where we see the people of Smyrna now. And so because that they had really put themselves, allied themselves, I guess you would say, with Rome so clearly because of their emperor worship and so forth, they actually enjoyed a pretty privileged status from Rome, and so it was a case of this city was really in Rome's back pocket, as it were, and so they were able to build the first temple in 23 AD. They built a temple to Emperor Tiberius Caesar, and so it was really the leading city in all of the Roman Empire for this Roman emperor worship. And we've seen where believers had run into this before. In fact, I think in our classes where we went through Galatians, that was one of the things that they had to deal with, was this emperor worship. The Roman Emperor Domitian, and he ruled from 81 to 96 AD. He was the first one to demand worship as a deity, as a test for political loyalty, so that if you didn't worship him as some kind of a deity, then you were a traitor to the empire. And so this is about the time when Domitian came to power. That was about the time where he banished John, the writer of Revelation, to the island of Patmos. And so this idea that emperor worship had by this time had really become a compulsory thing. Once a year, every Roman citizen had to burn a pinch of incense on the altar to the Godhead of Caesar, whoever the Caesar was. And and if he did that, then that was his, certificate or guarantee or whatever, that, he had done his religious duties for the year. And so all that believers had to do was go up there and burn a pinch of incense and say, Caesar is Lord, receive their certificate, and then they would go away and worship as they pleased. But, that's precisely what the believers, what the Christians would not do. They're not going to go up there and say that Caesar is Lord. And so they wouldn't call anyone Lord except Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, and him alone. So there's just no way that they would conform with that kind of an edict. So anyway, that's kind of where we are with Smyrna. I've got a map of it here so that you can kind of see where it is in relation to Ephesus, which we studied last week. And so there's Smyrna, and then down toward the southeast would be Israel and Jerusalem. So going on to the second part of verse 8, Yeshua describes himself to these people in Smyrna, as he says, these things says the first and the last, who was dead and then came to life. So this first and last, where did we see that before? We saw that in Revelation 1:11 and 1:17, where this is speaking of Yeshua's eternal character. So he's using this same description, and these are titles that really only belong to the Lord, according to Isaiah. Isaiah said in 41:4, I believe, that this one, the first and the last, that can only be described, that can only be used for God. So it says, who was dead and came to life. Now Yeshua chose this title from his initial appearance to John, and that's in Revelation 1:18, to remind the believers in Smyrna that they serve the risen Lord, victorious over death. Death cannot hold Yeshua, and it cannot hold his people. It's interesting, though, that Smyrna was also, back in those days, it was kind of known as a resurrection city. And the reason for that was, remember I told you that there was an old Smyrna and then the new Smyrna, that the old one had been, some conqueror came through there and he just wiped it out, just destroyed everything. This was 300-400 BC. And then Alexander the Great comes through. He looks at it and says, man, what a beautiful place this is. This was really beautiful at one time. Let's rebuild it. And so they just built from the ashes, right on the foundations, the old stuff, and they just built up. And when they built it, they really built quite a thing. In fact, they had in they call it in the Agora, and let me see, I think I've got some pictures. They had these places, arched walkways. They had a shopping mall there, a market that was 3 stories high, and it had running water and indoor plumbing in this big shopping area, and it had a nice coliseum. It's not as large as the one in Ephesus, but it's still, this one is pretty sizable. It was a good sized coliseum, and I believe those are the only pictures that I took of it, because it was just more old stones stacked up on top of each other, and some of them falling down. So that was enough. But this city was really, really something, and it was known as a resurrection city, or city that had been resurrected. And so therefore, I think it's kind of fitting then that Yeshua is talking to them there in Smyrna, as he uses this reference that I'm the first and the last. I was dead, but now I'm alive. And that's what the citizens of Smyrna would talk about their city, was that we were dead, but now we're alive. I just think that's kind of interesting. Also, the name of Smyrna, it comes from the sweet-smelling perfume called myrrh. That was the major shipping port for myrrh to be shipped out to the world. And in fact, they had the exclusive shipping rights to ship myrrh in the Roman Empire, and all myrrh had to somehow go through Smyrna. And of course, myrrh was what was used to embalm bodies, and they would have used that to prepare the body of Yeshua. And so it all kind of connects back into this idea of death and then resurrection. So go ahead and there's my notes for that one. Now Yeshua says that he says, I know your works, the tribulation and poverty, but they were a poor community for some reason, even though Smyrna itself was very prosperous. The believers in Smyrna were um, very poor, and the reason for that was because once they became a believer, then what we found was that they would be persecuted to the point that they could lose their jobs or lose their maybe their license to sell things or whatever. They came under a tremendous amount of opposition within the area, and the unlike some other places, the Jewish population here was very strong, and so they actually got we'll talk about it in a little bit, a lot of opposition from the Jewish community. So again, we look at this where Yeshua knew their works. If you knew from remember from last week when we talk about knew, the word knew that's used there is one that implies intimate relationship or just an expert knowledge of, so that when it says Yeshua knew their works, he knew them from upside, downside, inside out. He knew everything about all of the work that they were doing, the tribulation that they were going through, and how poor they were. And so he knew very intimately about this. And like I said, the people of Smyrna, the believers in Smyrna, would be robbed of their belongings once they became a believer, and then therefore they would not bow down to Caesar, as it were. They wouldn't get a certificate. So if they don't get a certificate, then they can't do business. And so it was a downward spiral. And they definitely were persecuted for the gospel. But you got to hand it to them. These people in Smyrna, that did not deter them from becoming believers and worshiping the Lord. And so, we have this kind of stuff going on even today. In fact, Israel is undergoing some of that, with this thing called BDS, and where they, the countries or people around the world are not investing in Israel, or they'll divest themselves of any kind of investments in Israel. And it's about the same kind of stuff that went on in Germany, in Nazi Germany, where they wouldn't give the Jews their licenses and so forth that they needed to carry out business. But Yeshua says, I know the blasphemy. He knew that the abuse that these believers endured of these religious men who say they are Jews and are not. Now, this this community, like I said, in Smyrna, the Jewish community in Smyrna was pretty large, and it was very hostile to the Nazarenes, as they were called, or the Christians, or however the followers of Yeshua. They were very hostile to these people. And but what did John say? What Yeshua said here, that John is just quoting, that these people are, they say they are Jews, but they're really not. And it says that they are a synagogue of Satan. And it's kind of interesting that if you knew today we look at synagogue as if you say synagogue, what immediately comes to mind is a Jewish place to worship. Same with, you say mosque, it's a Muslim place to worship. A church is a Christian, be it, whatever color, flavor of Christian that you can think of. When you say church, that's what we think of. But back in those days, this word synagogue was it was not specifically associated with the Jews. The word synagogue is one of these that just means a meeting place, like a city hall or a meeting hall, or a where someone has these buildings that they rent out for parties and events. So that's what a synagogue was. It was just a place to meet. And so you'll find in the book of Acts sometimes where Paul, it says that Paul would go to certain cities or whatever. And I think in Ephesus may be one of them, that where he went in and preached about or taught about Yeshua in in a synagogue for 3 months. And then later on in that passage, then it speaks of the synagogue of the Jews. Now, why would they have had to, specify that it was the synagogue of the Jews rather than just a plain synagogue, or because they had a meeting place, and it was called a synagogue, and then the meeting place of the Jews was a synagogue. So anyway, that's where they're talking about there with having this synagogue of Satan. It's also interesting that I believe that the word that they use, they would use, in this case, they use the word, I believe they use the word ecclesia or ecclesia. And that word translated all the other times in in Revelation, and pretty much throughout all of the New Testament, whenever you come across that word, the ecclesia, we think of a church, what we would consider a church. But when the people that translated this, especially into the King James, they looked at it and they said, well, here's an opportunity. And so rather than you saying the church of Satan, which church had become, this ecclesia had become associated with believers in Yeshua and with Christianity. Well, they didn't want to say this same word for them, so they reverted back to something that had much more of a Jewish flavor to it. It was a synagogue of Satan, they called it. So that's just I thought it was interesting, kind of a shows a little bit of bias there in the translation. Okay, I think we got through all of that kind of stuff, but then he says, though, that Yeshua says, I see all this. I see that you're in poverty. You've lost your jobs. You don't have any prospects for a job. There's tribulation. There's all sorts of stuff. But he said, you are rich. Now, all you had to do was to look at the people in Smyrna, the believers in Smyrna, and see that they were poor. They didn't have money. They didn't have jobs. They didn't have a way to even make money. So they were destitute. But Yeshua, he saw through, again, he saw, or he knew, he saw through their situation there. And so he knew that he could look down in their hearts and see that, okay, their hearts were right. And so therefore, that's why he called them rich, rather than, just saying, well, you guys are poor. You're really poor. You're just really, really poor. No, he says, yeah, you're in poverty. I see that. But you guys, you are rich. He could have said, yeah, you are blessed. And that would have been about the same kind of thing. So, this is what Yeshua considered them. He considered them rich, And basically it kind of goes to the thing that God doesn't look on the outside of us. He looks on the inside. And so some people that maybe on the outside, they don't have a whole lot. They're poor. They don't have the right clothes. They're driving an old beat up jalopy, and everyone would look at them and say, "Wow, those guys are poor." And but God could look on them and say, no, they are. They may not have a lot of the worldly goods, but they've got what really matters, and that's a good heart. So that's there again. That's what Yeshua was saying to these people. He says, "I know what you're all about, and you have riches that people just they've been storing up their riches in heaven." So let's go ahead and look at the next verses here. Revelation 10 and 11 says, "Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison, so that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life." Now, there's a lot of stuff in there. It says, "Do not fear what you are about to suffer." That's sometimes kind of hard, when somebody says, you're going through hard times, but don't be afraid, don't worry. And we've seen, people before that maybe a family member has a grave illness or a cancer or something like that, and what people tell them says, "Don't worry, just God's got it all under control." It's hard to do that. I mean, it's when it's you. It's like that old spiritual song. It's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. And that's kind of what these people in Smyrna would have been feeling right about that time. That even though they were very, very poor, and nothing that really stood out in the worldly sense, Yeshua says, you are rich. You stored up everything where it should have been. And he says, but now you're going to be suffering. And but don't be afraid of the suffering. Even though you're poor and you don't have anything to stand to fall back on, and you can't bribe the cops to leave you alone, don't worry about it. Do not fear, he says. So the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit about this fellow called the Bishop of Smyrna, and you may have heard of him referred to. His name was Polycarp, Polycarp, and he is a living, he's dead now, but he was an example, a real example of what Yeshua was talking about when he said that you're going to be thrown into prison. And they looked at, actually they were starting to, or they were persecuting the believers there in Smyrna, and it was it was getting really bad. And Polycarp was the head of the church there, and so he actually escaped to the countryside and stayed out there for a while to avoid prison. But there were other prisoners that Christian prisoners that suffered cruelly back in those days. Of course, prison wasn't for rehabilitation, and it wasn't in many cases for punishment. Prison was just a holding cell until they chopped your head off. So they didn't put Polycarp too much in prison, but what happened to him just falls right in line with what Yeshua said would happen to the church. He was captured, kept in prison for a little bit, but there were other people that were there in Smyrna that were in prison. And so what did Yeshua tell these people in Smyrna to do? He said, don't fear. And that's, I guess literally in the Greek, it's not do not fear, it's stop being afraid, because they were already afraid. I mean, who wouldn't be when you've lost your jobs, and daily they are taking people and throwing them in a coliseum, that very coliseum that I showed you back there. They would throw people in there and then let loose lions and tigers and bears, and oh my, and they would just have a horrible death. And so that would be something to be afraid of. And they were really persecuted there. Now Yeshua is just saying, look, you're going to be even persecuted more. And we do know that after this letter was written, the persecution was just kind of stepped up a little bit. And he said, the devil's going to throw you in prison. And he said, this is a spiritual battle, a spiritual warfare here, and that you will be in prison. You'll be thrown in there. So just don't be afraid. And it takes a lot of faith on the part of the people of Smyrna. I don't know what you would call the citizens of Smyrna. Smyrnians, Smyrnites, Smirnoff. I don't know, but so that's why I just say the people of Smyrna. It would just be so hard for them to be in the midst of all of this tribulation. Just think the Jews in Nazi Germany or in Poland in the Warsaw Ghetto or something like that, and then the Lord telling them, don't be afraid. And I'm sure that there were Christians there that did say, well, I am afraid, they just couldn't handle it. In fact, there are stories of some of the Christians, that they were brave, put on the brave face, and then when they got thrown in the lions, or they were about to be thrown in, they looked over there at the lions who were growling hungrily, and they said, okay, where's my incense? I'll burn the incense and say Caesar is Lord. Where's it at? And so then they would escape the punishment there, or the death. So we do know that it was recorded that there were some people like that, but it would be a bad place to be. Now, it says that you will have tribulation for 10 days. Now, that little phrase right there is much debated, and in fact, some people think that what John was talking about here was 10 years of persecution, and sometimes in this book here in Revelation, when they're talking about a day, they're talking it's a metaphor for years. And so some people say, well, he's saying that you will be persecuted for 10 years. And that was really precisely the duration of the persecution under Diocletian, and which, all of the Asiatic churches were very, very afflicted. Other people think that what John meant here was that the persecution it was persecution over the reign of 10 emperors, from Nero in AD 54, and then Domitian in 81, Trajan in 98, and Hadrian in 17, and it goes on down through there, so that there's basically 230 years of tribulation against these people in Smyrna. So then another thought on this 10 days business was that says that others observe that in 10 days are 240 hours, which make up the number of years from 85 when the second persecution began, under which John at this time was, to 325, which was the Council of Nicaea, when Christianity was deemed to be the state religion, and then all the persecution stopped. That's kind of twisted there. You know, it's just not something that I'd want to go and hang my hat on. And then other people say that the 10 days was simply a Greek expression of speech or an idiom that just says it's only going to last a while, you know, and so we don't know what the real meaning was there. Would just suffice it to say that they had a lot of persecution. So it really doesn't really matter which one you pick, because we know from history that they did go through a lot of the lion's den and different things. So and so, you know, what's our thing today? What's our lesson for today? Was that you know, we're going to be tested, but hang in there, because God does have it under control, and it's in the. It sounds a little bit trite to say it, but in the long scheme of things, our lives are very, very short in the you know, when you put us up against the panorama of all human history. But there again, then you put it up against the panorama of my own history, and tribulation of 10 years could be a lot of tribulation. So you know, again, it's a relative thing. So let's go on now. And I should point out here that all of the other churches that Yeshua spoke to, he would say nice things about them, but then they would say, but, and you know, see, you're always kind of waiting for that, but, however, that sort of thing. Like someone was telling me the other day at Tree of Life that they were a visitor, and they said, we really like, they were paying me a compliment. It was a very kind thing to do, and very nice that they would do that. And then her voice kind of trailed off. And I said, okay, and now comes the however, here comes the but. And she says, what? I said, well, you said all these good things, and then it sounded like you were fixing to say, but, and no, she wasn't. She just, I guess she had finished what she was going to say. But, you know, every other one of these churches, the Yeshua does say that you have done this well, you've done this well, you've done this well, but I have this against you. This is the only congregation that Yeshua did not chastise a bit. Everything that he said for them was just, you know, encouraging, or I don't know, matter of fact, I guess you would say, just so that they would know what they would be coming up against. The believers in Smyrna, they were tested. They were definitely tested, but they passed the test. There was no evil spoken against them or anything, you know, against them at all. And this church, evidently, the Christian community in Smyrna still exists today. Now, they did, you know, I couldn't tell you today, because now, you know, they've got a guy there that's trying to make himself the an emperor or certainly heading toward dictatorship with President Erdogan in power there in Turkey. But this church did survive for many years, and according to some sources here, that they still exist today. That there is a Christian community there in Smyrna. So, and the takeaway from this is that we're going to be tested. I believe that God does test us sometimes. Look at what he did with Job. He tested Job, and I believe that God tests us. Well, why does he test us? Well, that's because in some cases he needs to like burn up the dross, as it were. The idea of smelting silver, when you heat it up, and then when you heat it up, it releases toxins and impurities that they'll float to the top of the little crucible where you've got the silver melted, and then you scrape that off, and it's it's one of those things that you just keep doing that refining. You're refining the silver, and somebody will ask, well, how do you know when do you quit doing that? And the answer, of course, is that when the silversmith looks into the molten silver, and he sees his reflection, perfectly reflected back to him. And that's kind of like when God is testing us, that he puts the fire on sometimes to see how we're going to react. And then what that does then is he's able to sweep away the corruption, sweep away the things that shouldn't be there. And so when does he quit? When he looks down in there, and you can see the Maker's reflection. When your life is such that you reflect Yeshua, then you've been tested to that point, and God, that's kind of what he's wanting us to do. He's wanting us to be refined. So I sure would not like to go through a martyr's death and die like that, but it may very well be in this country. Who knows what's gonna happen in this country or around the world? We're already seeing that. I was reading one thing today about persecution. They said that they believe there's been more Christians killed in this century, in our lifetime anyway. There's been more believers of Yeshua killed than all the rest of the history back 2,000 years combined. So I don't know how they get that many numbers and how they came up with that. But even if it was only half truth, that's a lot of people. And we do know that with the likes of ISIS and that sort of thing, a lot of Christians are being persecuted to the point of death even today. And so what does what happens with us today? A lot of believers, they'll avoid persecution by conforming so much to the world that people, they just don't even notice that they're Christians. It's like that old song that if you were arrested for being a Christian or a believer, would they find enough evidence to convict you? And it was kind of a catchy tune, and I think it was kind of popular with Southern gospel quartets or something like that. I haven't heard it in many, many years, but that was it was always a thought provoker to me that, okay, if somebody was going to take you and arrest you for being a Christian, Could they look at your life? Could they look at your library? Could they look at your computer and determine, yep, this guy's a Christian, or whoa, what's that doing on his computer, you know? And, you know, you see what I'm getting at is that believers need to know that, you know, they could come under persecution, and Yeshua says, hang in there. What did he say? Be faithful until death, and I'll give you a crown of life. Now, faithful unto death, really? Because sometimes these deaths are not they're not easy. They're not quick, and you know, he's just saying, you know, some of you are going to die for the faith. Be you know, be faithful all the way up until that time. And you know, he didn't rebuke the people of Smyrna at all. He never said, but I have this against you, because he knew what they were going through. But what does he say? At the end of the day, he said that if you are faithful, there's a crown that goes to those that are faithful. Now, there were a couple of different kind of crowns back in those days. You had the crown of royalty, the gold thing that sits on top of somebody's head, the king's head, and then they had the other crowns that went to champions, you know, in the races and or the wrestling arena, or in the gymnasium, that in their games. That there would be a woven crown, a temporary woven crown of laurel, you know, leaves or something like that, that they would put over the person's head. In fact, a lot of weddings in the Middle East, they would have a crown for the bride and the groom. But that's the kind of crown that you would get for being an athlete. But those kind of crowns was not what Yeshua was talking about. He was talking about a royal crown, a crown that was actually much more, much finer, much you know, richer than any crown that any king had ever worn, and which is saying something. If any of you have ever been to Great Britain and the Tower of London and viewed the crown jewels that they have, they're probably a replica of the crown jewels. I can't see them putting that out there. But anyway, even if they are a replica, wow, those things are really, really dazzling. And so Yeshua said, no, this will be a crown. It's even going to be better than that, because it'll be a crown of life. And you know, what did he say to the people in Ephesus? You'll be able to eat from the tree of life. And then here he's saying you have a crown of life. So this story of Smyrna, I'm going to wrap it up with the story of Polycarp, because Polycarp is an example of what Yeshua was trying to tell the people of Smyrna. They were going to be suffering persecution, and then we have this fellow Polycarp, who was a disciple of, or a follower, a student of John the Revelator, Saint John, who is writing this book of writing the letters, writing the book of Revelation. And so he was a student of John, and by all accounts, he was a very, very pious, devout, righteous man. He followed the Lord you know, very, very closely. Okay, so I was going to say he followed the Lord religiously, but I think he did even better than that. And so this guy Polycarp. He was they called him the Bishop of Smyrna, and it's kind of interesting. Like I said, they'd taken Polycarp out to a farm someplace so that he wouldn't be captured and persecuted. But one night he had a dream that his pillow caught on fire, and he woke up and he just felt like, okay, this is the Lord telling me that I'm gonna die in I'll be burned at the stake. And so, against his friend's wishes, he did go back to Smyrna, and the guards that had come to pick him up, and they looked at this little 85-year-old frail fellow who was praying, and when they came to gather him up, he said, well, first let's eat. Come on, let's eat. So that these guards are looking at each other and thinking, what is this? And so he asked them to eat, and so they eat, and then kept asking, can't you just burn a little incense? Say Caesar's Lord. You don't even have to mean it. You just say it, and then you'll be off the hook. You don't have to worry about it. And they said, no, I'm gonna go on, and we're gonna go back to Smyrna and just do whatever is required. And so they went back and they put him up against the government officials and the police, the chief of police, and so forth. And they tried to persuade him to, please don't go through with this. Just take a little pinch of the incense, throw it in the fire, and say, I renounce Christ. Is what they said, to renounce Christ. So, which actually would be a lot stronger than him throwing the incense in there and said that Caesar is Lord. But he wouldn't do it. First he was silent, but then when he did give them an answer, it left them they didn't have to imagine what his thought process was on that one, because he was very, very clear. Now, when they brought Polycarp back to Smyrna, they had one of these games in progress, where the people had gathered in the Colosseum there, and they had the wild animals and so forth, and they were throwing the Christians in there. And what happened was that that some of these one of the guys that was supposed to be there, that to be thrown in the lion's den, he boldly proclaimed Yeshua, and so they got him up there on the dock, and they were fixing to throw him into to the lions, and he looked down on there and he said, maybe I'll live to fight another day. And so he went ahead and took the pinch of incense and said, Hail Caesar, whatever it was. And so he was let off. But then there was another young man whose name was Germanicus, and he didn't back down. He marched right out and faced the lions, and of course he died a martyr's death. But then when they brought Polycarp out there, here's the guy, he's like 85 years old, and so probably not all of that strong, maybe feeble, who knows. But according to the writings, in court, who can say some of this stuff did or did not happen? But I'm just going to go ahead and read it. And it says, when Polycarp brought his tired body into the arena, he and other believers heard a voice from heaven saying, "Be strong, Polycarp, play the man." As he stood before the proconsul, they tried one more time to get him to renounce Yeshua. The proconsul told Polycarp to agree with the crowd and shout, away with the atheists. And Polycarp looked sternly at this bloodthirsty mob, waved his hands toward them, and said, "Away with those atheists." And the proconsul persisted, "Take the oath and revile Christ, and I'll set you free." And then that's where Polycarp issued his famous statement that I've been hearing this statement because I had a pastor friend that used to use this all the time. But here's the famous statement. Maybe you've heard it. "For 86 years I've served Yeshua. How dare I now revile my king?" And so he actually said, I've got it here. 86 years I've served Christ, nor has he ever done me any harm. How then could I blaspheme my king who saved me? I bless thee for ordaining me worthy of this day and this hour, that I may be among thy martyrs and drink the cup of my Lord Jesus Christ. So that's quite a that's quite a statement from somebody. And so Michael said the way I see it is that believers should basically expect persecution, especially the closer we get to the return of Yeshua. Yeah, I think I don't know that we could say over here in America that we should expect persecution. Maybe some. Like right now, you already see persecution in the form of job discrimination and other forms of discrimination, just because of the fact that you may be a believer in Yeshua. And so, if that's persecution, we should expect that as a minimum. And then who knows, with all of these crazies coming over here from all over the world that don't agree with our type of way of life nor our religion, there could definitely be some persecution coming our way. So anyway, the crowd there, when Polycarp was brought in, they said, "Let the lions loose." But guess what? The lions had already gone back. They'd taken them out. They had put them in their cages and rolled them away. And so then they said, "Well, we can't do the lions. Let's burn him at the stake." So, Polycarp remembered his dream, and he was encouraged by it because he knew that we knew that God was with him. And so he told his executioners, "It is well." He says, "I fear not. The fire that burns for a season and for a while is quenched. Why do you delay? Come on, let's do your will." So they arranged all the wood, that typically the symbolic way that you do the guy in the middle with the stake with the wood all around him and everything. And that's when Polycarp says, "I thank you that you have graciously thought me worthy of this day and of this hour, and that I may receive a portion in the number of the martyrs in the cup of your Christ." So after he prayed, he gave thanks to God. They set the fire. They set the wood on fire. But guess what? The fire went up, and it just, the witnesses say, and this was documented, the fire just went all around him, and he was in basically a bubble there, and he wasn't dying. The fire was not burning him. And so one of the executioner was furious, because when a prisoner doesn't die, or when they don't do what they're supposed to do, in this case, scream in agony and pain, and then finally trying to escape and all that kind of stuff that the crowd was looking for, he took a long spear and ran Polycarp through. He stabbed him, and at that point he died. So Polycarp did not die the death of burning to death. He died from the loss of blood. In fact, it said that the blood came out of him and quenched the fire. So, or quenched part of the fire. So anyway, then other witnesses said that they saw a dove fly up from the smoke in heaven, and at the same time that this happened, the church leader in Rome called Irenaeus, he said that he just heard the Spirit of God tell him Polycarp is dead. And so God had called his servant home. He did fulfill what Yeshua said that would happen to the people in Smyrna. So it says, those who overcome, though, you don't have to be worried about the second death. What is the second death? That's the judgment of the non-believer. So that's the same for us. You know, if we stay with it and stay true to the word, stay true to the Lord, then no matter what happens to us, we don't have to fear that second death. This death here, in a little bit, it's over, but that second death will last an eternity. We don't have to worry about that. That is it for the class tonight, and I'm going to open everything up and see if anybody's got any comments. And I know there's been some things on chat that you can all sit there and read. But the question was, you know, that do we expect persecution? Yeah, I think we should expect persecution, and a lot of it may be just kind of mild at first, but it could very well get to the point of, you know, losing your jobs. And you know, there are those in government even today that would say that, you know, if you're a believer and have all those weird ideas about what sin is, and these people that are living in sin, and you don't like that, we won't go into that, but you know, they would like you to lose your job, and many people have. So anyway, any comments, questions, additions to all of this that you've read about Smyrna? Okay. Well, in that case, then I will just bid everyone a good evening, and we will be progressing on in chapter 3, then working toward chapter 3 there in Revelation, and going on to the next church. And just stay with us, and we will see you next week. Now, just as a planning purposes, I believe it's the last, no, it's the 20th of May. We will be traveling, and so I won't be able to do a class. It's just I could possibly be someplace where I could do it, but you know, I'm not going to try to guarantee that I'm going to be able to do a class. So we'll just take a week off from that. On May 20th, we will, or May 21st, I guess it would be, that Sunday, we will be out of town and actually traveling back home, and from a real quick weekend trip. And so we won't be able to be with you then. So, all right, so I'll go ahead and bid everyone a Lila Tov, Shavua Tov, and we'll see you next week.